Unfortunately, Simon, I agree with Crofty on this
Thank
one.
you very much. Congratulations on AFC.
Thank you. I know this is not a football podcast, but yes, we went to Wembley and the Dons are going up.
But maybe there was a bit more going on in the Lando Norris corner than we anticipated. Maybe he was suffering just a little bit more.
Greetings, everybody, and welcome to the latest F1 Show podcast, sponsored by Audi, in which we are going to consider the curious case of the Monaco Grand Prix experiment, which, having talked to a few senior people on the plane on the way back from Nice, I think it's safe to say perhaps it didn't work. So, how do we solve this? Can it be solved? Does it even matter to those sipping champagne on the yachts? Well, it might not matter to them, but it does matter to you at home, and we want to consider some of the options. We're going to do that, and we're going to do that with the help of, yes, welcome back, Bernie Collins. Bernie Collins fans, what do we call them? Do we call them the Bernadettes? I think we should. We'll christen them the Bernadettes. I don't know what you call David Croft fans, but David Croft is here.
Unlucky.
For his first time this year. You do have a fan club, though, don't you? You're always selling merch. I know that.
Simon Lazenby, the fact that you are wearing merch today from your excesses at Wembley yesterday, congratulations on AFC.
Thank you. I know this is not a football podcast, but yes, we went to Wembley and the Dons are going up. Ole, ole. It was a great afternoon. You know, it was one of the worst games of football I've seen for quite some time. Very pragmatic. It didn't matter at all to the travelling army of Dons fans. There must have been 35,000 of us there at Wembley yesterday. So got off the plane, got the kids up there. We had a magnificent day. And then, so if I've got a bit of a hoarse voice, it's because we were singing assorted chants as we progressed to the League One from League Two. You know, dizzying heights.
You're saying the hoarseness is from the football, definitely not from excessive weekend in Monaco.
Yeah, we don't do that anymore. That would be coffee, yacht hopping.
He went to bed early on Saturday night. He was a very good boy. Yeah. I mean, when I say early, I meant early morning, but he did go to bed.
You weren't even with me. You were going from yacht to yacht. Oh, I know what you're like. But yes, that game of football was probably about the same level as the Monaco Grand Prix, which, I mean, look, as good as Saturday is, Sunday suffered. We'll come on to that in a moment. But let's first of all, let's start with a positive, shall we? Bernie, you were obviously watching it from back at home. We're going to see you in Barcelona. But Lando Norris, the damage done to the rest on Saturday, but what a weight off his shoulders to pick up a pole position, his first since Australia, and then convert it.
Yeah, a pole position when it really mattered. Monaco, we know, is about qualifying. It is a Saturday competition. So, and like you say, Lando Norris has been suffering in the last few races, not getting that final lap in Q3 together. I guess a lot of us thought when they went out for the push final run of Q3 with McLaren, thinking, oh, is that the right thing to do? They've gone quite early there. But it worked. It worked really well. And Lando got the lap together when it really needed to be put together, despite some very tough competition out there. And that's what made the difference. That's what made the difference to his weekend. And hopefully he has turned that around. Whatever he's changed in the background team, that's working, whatever's working for him to get that lap together. And that will give him real confidence going forward, because that needs to happen at this stage of the year.
It felt to me, Crofty, like it was a pivotal moment in the championship, didn't it? To you, in just everything that he's been suffering from psychologically, beating himself up in a very public manner. He was totally different on Saturday evening. Once he got that pole position, Zach's going around high-fiving everyone, changing his flight so he wasn't going to go to the Indy 500. He said that he wasn't going to go if they had a front rower, and they did, and they had the pole sitter. Zach's going around completely bonkers. Lando was very, just matter of fact, pragmatic.
Yeah. I'd lost my groove, said Lando. I've had it all my life and it had gone. But yesterday, I felt like I'd got it back. That was his quote after qualifying and on the Sunday. And that shows the extent, I think, of how much that pole position mattered. Had he lost his groove? Had we noticed that he'd lost his groove? He'd certainly lost the ability to go and claim a pole position. his teammate Max Verstappen had taken care of that one. But maybe there was a bit more going on in the Lando Norris corner than we anticipated. Maybe he was suffering just a little bit more. And I think his emotions after the victory and the way that he kind of dedicated it to his mum and dad as well, and the way that he came on and was so overjoyed, so emotional, almost tearful that he had won that, shows how important it was. And it's not just about Monaco. It's the fact that we're now a third of the way through the season. Had he have lost more ground to his teammate, he could have ended up a win behind Oscar Piastri. Had that race gone against him. It didn't. 3 points in it now. And here's the thing. Had we not lost that point for the fastest lap, I think Lando Norris would now be leading the World Championship. So there's a lot of Lando fans who be saying, bring back the extra point. And I don't think we should have lost it in the first place. So all is not lost for Lando. But then again, all is not lost for Oscar, who has been equally as impressive at times as his teammate. I think we are in for a sensational season, the way that this first third has ended.
I do. It feels to me like 2016. It feels to me like that, the intra-team battle, doesn't it, between Rosberg and Hamilton. 3 points of difference, as you're saying. But in the constructors, actually, McLaren are now, I think, 172 points clear of their nearest rivals, who at this stage are Mercedes. And then there's only 5 points between second and fourth. So that in itself, in behind, is going to be really interesting. But they're almost away and gone, aren't they, Bernie?
Yeah, I think McLaren, from everything that we can see, their constructors looks pretty safe. But, as Crofty said, it is early in the year. We're only a third of the way through the year. So I think this year and the team's battle, and like you say, second, third, fourth, all very, very tight. How quickly can teams shift focus to next year, retain focus on this year? It's really hard one to call that, I think. More difficult than other years because of the regulation change we have next year. Teams are going to have to very carefully balance this year's championship and next year's championship. McLaren will be glad to be getting the points on the board now. That'll mean that they can maybe back off a little bit later on. But if they back off too soon and the others don't, then it's a few weeks before the upgrades appear, and then suddenly it's too late to do anything about it. So I think it's going to be very careful working out in the background of these teams when they shift more of their focus to next year's car.
What I would say, though, Bernie, that massive gap that McLaren have got, just to me, puts to bed this nonsense debate about we need a number one and a number two driver at McLaren. Forget that. McLaren's statement is we'll pursue the best interests of the team while preserving the interests of the drivers, and put it into Zach Brown words, we haven't got a number one and number two, and we won't have a number one and number two unless, one can't win the championship. And as racing fans, and we're going to get onto this with Monaco, I think, we want to see racing. We don't want to see team orders. We don't want to see drivers sacrificing their race for somebody else. So why this big debate about how we should have a number one and a number two at McLaren has come up, I really don't understand. They're making the points that they need as constructors and then let the drivers scrap it out. And that's where I also think, go back to 2016, we're on for a mega season here. Because it's what Mercedes did, because they had that big advantage and they could.
But it does depend on how close Max is. So at the moment, 22 points behind Lando. If they do sort of disappear, you don't think it matters? What I think it does.
Because for the team, they want to win the Constructors' Championship, right?
Yeah.
The team are not going to sacrifice a driver when both can win a Drivers' Championship, whilst they can easily win a Constructors' Championship. There's no point in doing that, because all you're going to do is hasten the exit out the door of either Lando or Oscar, who now know they're
I agree with that. I don't know if I agree with that. I think if it comes down to it, the drivers is the one that they want now. I mean, they say that they want the constructors, obviously, but they've won the constructors. So let's give you a hypothetical, right? Let's say one of the two drivers gets 25, 30 points ahead, right?
Yeah.
But Max is hot on the heels. Are they not going to put all their eggs in the basket of the one that's there? And, are they not actually going to do a Monaco Grand Prix and use the second of the drivers to actually be the buffer?
Why do that unless one of them can't win? That's a ridiculous demotivator for any driver when there's, a long enough period to go in the season and they're now being told they can't win a championship.
Unfortunately, Simon, I agree with Crofty on this
Thank
one.
you
Okay.
very much, Bernie. It's the protest.
I think that, when it's very hard to tell a driver very early in the season they can't do it. I think the exception is what I think Zach said himself. If they get to a point where they're crashing into each other and therefore risking the Constructors' Championship, that's the point that I think they'll get involved and say enough is enough. But for now, when they're fighting cleanly and both gaining good points in the Constructors' Championship, there will become a point where mathematically they have the Constructors' Championship and that's done. And then at that point, there's even less need for them to tell them to hold station. And Zach wants it all. He wants 1, 2 in the
Yeah,
drivers,
he
and he
does.
wants 1 in the constructors. So he's going to try and keep his drivers as happy as he can
As
to make that
possible.
happen.
Yeah. To be fair to me, by the way, I am playing devil's advocate, but I'm also saying that it's what I wasn't talking about now. I was talking about further down the line. So there we go. All right, let's get into what happened then in the race. I'm not accepting this, Croft. I'm not accepting this. So Liam, basically, we sat next to senior strategy, myself and Kroon, senior strategy analyst, I think he is, for the Racing Bulls, Nick Roberts on the plane. And we were talking about, well done, we congratulated them. We said strategy team of the week is obviously the Racing Bulls. They did everything that they could do. They were the first ones to pull the trigger in terms of saying, okay, let's back the trucks up, let's create the hole, and allow Isaac Hadjar to pit into it through Liam Lawson. He was the sacrificial lamb. And I think it took Williams by surprise, but it was the genius move, but it was obviously, Bernie, premeditated, and it kind of became the story of the Monaco Grand Prix.
Yeah, there was a lot of talk pre-race about how one teammate could help another teammate. I think there was a bit of talk around the Ferraris, around McLaren, and I sort of thought for those two, it's very harsh because the second teammate has still got good points on the board, so you don't want to sacrifice one of those two. I think for RB, they did a really good job. They had premeditated the plan. I can't emphasize enough how much work goes into Saturday night strategy and Sunday morning strategy in order to look at what all the permutations might be, why it might not work, what all the other drivers would do. And, RB with Hadjar had this really good opportunity to score really good points. And they put all their eggs in that basket. They committed to the strategy, opened the pit gap very slowly because they'd planned it from the beginning of the race. And then they were really fortunate with Lawson because everyone else is on the pit wall. Crofty's talking to James Vowles on the pit wall, and their pit wall's starting to think, we can see what's coming together here now. We can do this with our 2 cars to get the last point scoring positions. And because Williams then opened the gap between their 2 drivers, it allowed Lawson not really to have any disadvantage for helping Hadjar out. So for RB, they must have been rubbing their hands together when they seen Williams start to employ the same tactic because suddenly it's all coming together. But because Williams did it so much later in the race, they only really started lap 25, they had to make the gap much more quickly. So they had to lose more time each lap. And that's where we've seen all the issues coming into it. But, well done, RB. And the work was still done on Saturday, let's be clear. Hadjar getting a good qualifying position. That's what left them in this position to ensure they had good points. But well done them.
I think that's what they love so much is that Williams weren't expecting it. And even Carlos Sainz admitted that afterwards. He was like, yeah, we got that one right. We were strategy team of the day, and well done to them.
Now, the thing is, McLaren could have done the same, with Lando Norris and Oscar Piastri, should they have needed it as well. They didn't. I think the top 4 kind of drove their normal race on that one. But it's a strategy that McLaren could easily have done. And where would Zach Brown have been asking Oscar Piastri to sacrifice his race for Lando?
I think for, I do agree, Crofty, but I think for the top ones, it would have been really harsh for Lando or Oscar to do that. I think, again, even for Hadjar to do it for Verstappen, that would have been so, in that midfield or towards the end of the field and the constructors is so tight, every point is going to count. So for Hadjar to sacrifice his race in any way to help Verstappen would have been a bit harsh, I think. And none of this is new at Monaco. We get this at Monaco every year because you can drive 2.5 seconds off the pace and hold on to the position. So I was quite surprised, I think, that Williams and Mercedes weren't really expecting this to happen. I think a lot of people sat in the race and went, what are Mercedes going to do? What is the game plan? How long is this race going to go without a pit stop or without, forcing the hand at something? We've seen, Behrman stop very, very early. A few people stopped very early under that early VSC. I thought Moore might have done something there. We
It's only
didn't
the
see the
bottom
double.
four, wasn't it? It was the
Yeah, we
bottom
didn't see
four
the
that
double
went
stop from anyone. So yeah, lots of team play, but that's always been Monaco. When you start outside the top 10, it's very, very difficult.
See, the thing for me about this weekend is that what it did was it drew into focus once more. It probably highlighted even more that Monaco, for the moment, isn't fit for purpose as a Grand Prix track. But does that matter? So what you have now is you have a situation whereby George Russell's talking about sprinklers. He's talking about making it a double qualifying session, Saturday, Sunday. You've got Verstappen talking about banana skins. Can I just read out a few of, the fans obviously were pretty apoplectic about it, as they always are with regards to Monaco. Botra Albino, the crown jewel is now the clown jewel of F1. Kieran.f321, should we just accept Monaco will always be a qualifying race? I got this on vinyl, says, will I ever get those 2 hours back? No, you won't. How can they be losing tracks like Spa or talking about that, but keep Monaco? And CR Lewis won. WTF was that? I think that kind of sums it up. It's what are we going to do about it?
What are you going to do about it? That's not the right question to ask. To me, the question to ask is, what do you want to do about it? Yeah. What do you want Monaco to be? Do you want it to be a race full of overtakes every other lap? Because that's not going to happen unless you get major structural engineering changes on the streets of Monaco. Do you want it to be an outlier because it's a 30 race season, 6 sprints and 24 Grand Prix, and they're all a little bit different? And if that's the case, then how much of an outlier in terms of overtaking versus strategic opportunities do you want to make it? And then where is the sport going with the size of cars and the size of tracks in the future? Because only when you answer all of those questions can you settle on something that might give us a chance of a more absorbing Monaco Grand Prix. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I think, I agree with what you're saying, Crofty. I think from my side, sat at home watching it, it was bloody confusing because
Yeah.
2 stops, it's really hard to know what's going on. Like I run, as you may well expect, some additional data on a laptop. It's not just not just the TV, but I try and keep on top of what's going on. And even with the extra data, and I seen there was some extra graphics went up on the TV about how many stops everyone had done. It was so hard to work out what was going on. And to watch as a race, it was a bit difficult. It was a bit of a struggle, despite Crofty's best efforts on the commentary, as always. But and so that I felt that was a bit difficult at home. It was a difficult one to watch. Monaco has always been a Saturday race. I agree with the size of the cars, as Crofty says, and that's something in automotive as a whole. We want extra fuel efficiency, we want it to be greener, but we're making these massive cars. So if we want more overtaking, we've got to be lighter and nimbler. That's one thing. It is a qualifying race. So do we just do 2 qualifyings? We should accept it. There's other races that are difficult to overtake as well. The one thing I did enjoy was I enjoyed watching the RB strategy play out. And then I enjoyed waiting for others to react to it. Like I quite liked seeing that. And qualifying, I love watching Monaco qualifying. I love seeing what goes on there. There's just no margin for error in any of it. We even seen that with Mercedes. Mercedes had a terrible day on Saturday which is very abnormal for them because of unreliability with one car. So it's about getting everything together. So the Saturday's the day to watch, and at other tracks that's reversed, where Sunday's, next week. Sunday will be the day to watch, not the Saturday. So that's okay, I think.
Yeah. Here's a solution I've been working on. But you can tell me whether this was ever considered, and I don't know if people have done it in the past. Right, this was not going to work, by the way, for listeners on Spotify. But here is the map of Monaco. But when you get to turn 7, Mirabeau Inferior, rather than going straight down to Portier, which is down there, why don't you turn left onto the Avenue Princess Grace and go down there? They could narrow the central reservation there, go down long straight, heavy braking zone at one of these roundabouts down here, widen it, make it a big hairpin, and then come back down and go through the tunnel and then do something to the chicane at the end. Has anyone ever suggested that yet?
First and foremost, well done, because you've obviously muted me on your phone. I've just messaged you. Okay. No, I've just messaged you 2 words: rubbish idea, and it didn't pop up on your phone.
Why is that a rubbish idea? Because you'd then have to, because they're becoming too fast down into the tunnel, and then Nouvelle Chicane. You couldn't do that.
Yes, yeah, you'd need even more runoff area for that. But
which you can't actually engineer, although that's one of Alex Wertz's solutions, isn't it?
Well, so Alex Wertz, right, and I'm going to mention Alex Wertz here because Alex designs some very fine tracks. He's his company behind the new Qiddiya track in Saudi. He designed a track for Rwanda as well, if that ever comes to fruition. He's a very good designer. He's also, on the chairman of the GPDA, so has a lot of input from drivers. His idea is to lengthen the exit out of the tunnel towards that Nouvelle Chicane, but to make the corner much tighter, that left-hand corner much tighter, and then to go out further where at the moment there is water. Now, it involves a little bit of reclaiming land, but not a lot. And then you turn right and allow drivers to get on the gas a little bit earlier than they normally would coming out of the now left-hander, so they can make the run down to Tabac and still have to back off a little bit at Tabac and not take it flat out because they're doing the same speeds as they now would be. That would create an overtaking opportunity that's not necessarily all on the lumps and bumps coming out of the tunnel and down that hill. Now, I think that's a fabulous idea because it doesn't involve a huge amount of structural change. He also advocates that we, at Rascasse, we move the apex out 2 or 3 meters, and the area to the left on the track gets moved out a little bit as well. And he also advocates that we can straighten up the entry into the Lowe's hairpin to stop drivers having to come into that hairpin and move to the right before they then go left. Straighten it up so you can dive bomb down the inside. But you do need the permission of Monaco to make changes to their roads. And whilst the place is packed, and everyone is coming to see the race and spending lots of money, and it shows no signs of getting less and less popular in terms of people wanting to go, why on earth would they change? Because that involves a lot of money being spent.
Yeah, I think, there's so many things. Lots of people are saying we shouldn't change anything. It's Monaco. It's the way it's always been. But, we have made changes to other tracks. Singapore is one that immediately springs to mind. It was very, very difficult to overtake. We've made changes to that in order to improve overtake and improve the race, and they've definitely worked.
That was by accident because they were renovating the stand. So they just took out 4 corners and carried on the straight. We're not talking about taking things out. We're talking about adding things here. And that's the big trouble for me, is that it's going to involve money.
Tracks change all the time anyway. I mean, I think people get a bit overprotective of the streets of Monaco when they're not fit for purpose at the moment for racing. Just try stuff if they're prepared to pay it.
I think we have to keep trying things. I'm glad. I wasn't convinced of the 2-stop before we went into it. I'm glad we've tried it, because if we did another race like last year, that would have been even worse. We got no stops. So it's good that we're doing something. Let's keep working on it. There's definitely things to be learned. But it will not take away from how special qualifying is at Monaco. And we spoke a little bit before, but spectators love it.
Do we think next year, with the changes in regulations, as JB was pointing out, they're going to be slightly smaller, the cars? They're not going to be massively smaller, are they? But with the change in regulations, is that going to create bigger deltas and more overtaking opportunities?
I think we'll see more overtaken everywhere, because of how the cars are going to recover and charge and these things. I'm let's see. We need to get into the regulations. I think there's a long way to go to make those work, because it could again be like this race and really confusing when people are harvesting, when people are deploying, what's going on.
Don't make knee-jerk reactions on this one. See how next year pans out. There are people. I spoke to people at the airport from within the sport who have suggestions for a few tweaks that can be made. But if you found it confusing, Bernie, watching it, we need to be careful on making tweaks. I see people saying, "Oh, you can't drive more than 3 seconds a lap slower than your first lap or whatever." You start introducing rules like that, it gets really confusing, not just to people watching, but people trying to police it and regulate as well. Because I'm not sure the FIA have all the enough people to regulate every single lap of every single car going around a Grand Prix 78 times. But there's just one thing I would say, and Lasers, you were at the airport on Sunday night, but you were in a different terminal to Ted and I. Not a single person that came up who had been there said, "I've had a really bad weekend. It was awful." Instead, they all said, "We loved it. It was brilliant.
Yeah.
You've got to go to Monaco. It's just a fantastic spectacle." So people that are going are loving it. And I get why people watching back at home don't feel that love. But it is a really special place, and it has always been. And ever since I started watching Monaco, it has not been full of overtakes. So why are we trying to engineer a race now that's full of overtakes?
So, Bernie, is it a flat no to my Avenue of Princess Grace?
Yes.
I'm not saying no to it. I'm going to have to give you this point, Simon, because I gave Crofty the point earlier. So, in fairness, I will
Might have
agree
to
with
take
you that
up
we
circuit
could.
design.
Have
Could make.
you been down the Avenue Princess Grace? It's not wide enough to get cars down there. You'd have to completely change the road because and remove curbs, remove trees, remove pavements because it isn't wide enough on either side of the road to get the straight that you want to see some overtaking.
I want to see that straight, and I want to. Also, isn't Nico Rosberg's apartment near there? We'd end up blocking him in for the weekend, which would be quite amusing for us anyway. Should we finish this part then with what is our new feature? We haven't got a sponsor for it yet, but we are hanging out for one, which is our winner of the week, our shocker of the week, and our moment of the weekend. Bernie, I'd like to start with you on this one, please.
Winner of the week has to go to Lando Norris for qualifying and the race. Shocker of the week is a joint prize won by the entire Mercedes for qualifying shockers and then race shockers. And the moment of the week, Simon, goes from, obviously I watched a lot of the coverage because I don't like to miss out. The moment of the week is Crofty getting driven around the circuit by Kimi Antonelli because heaven forbid someone would forget their pass and miss out on such a global grand opportunity. And at home, that really came across on the coverage.
That was my shocker of the week. That was my shocker. Yeah. I had that down as my shocker of the week. Ted's massive head that couldn't fit into a helmet. Me having a nightmare with my pass. I left it. It's the first time in about 4 years I've done that. And then gifting it to Crofty. I'm happy.
Snooze, you lose.
What are yours, Crofty? I presume your winner is that, or maybe that's your moment of the weekend as well.
Winner, Nick Roberts, head of strategy at Racing Bulls, who did exactly what he needed to do to produce a brilliant result for the team. Well done, Nick Roberts, and your strategy team. Now, I was told it was loser of the week,
Yeah, well, I changed that because it sounds too harsh.
My loser of the week, Nick Roberts and his strategy team at Racing Bulls for spoiling everybody's fun and ruining the Monaco Grand Prix. Don't ever think about doing that again. Ridiculous. And my moment of the week, well, guess what? Other than Lance Stroll overtaking Nico Hülkenberg on the last lap, it was really good. And seriously, it was a brilliant move. Simon Lazenby losing his pass on my hot lap with Kimi. But whatever happens, I've now been on a hot lap around the Monaco Grand Prix, and only when you're in a car at immense speeds do you appreciate the skill of all the drivers in every series that managed to get at least one lap in without crashing. It's frightening, and it's utterly breathtaking in equal measure.
What were yours, Simon?
nothing else matters apart from my shocker of the week, frankly. After that, but I'll go winner Isaac Hadjar. Somebody said something to him just to clear it up as he was on his way to join us in presentation. And I like this about him. He's feisty. He wasn't going to let it go. He was just like, no, you're not going on to the energy station after that. I don't know what was said or anything like that, but it clearly really got to him. And he's my winner just because I think I really like him. I think he's right up there, in with a shout of rookie of the season with the way he's performing week in, week out. I love the fact that he takes no prisoners either. As we saw, he's clearly one of these characters who is not going to mind getting his elbows out. So I love that. So he's my winner. Shocker. We've discussed that. And again, my moment of the week was Hadjar. So I'm going to give it all to Hadjar because it's easy to give it to Lando. Not that I'm denigrating that. But so yes, he's going to take the plaudits. And yeah, my shocker is Croft, but my shocker is so often the Croft. There we are. Should we take we'll take a short break and then we'll come back. We'll discuss everything else that happened on the weekend, and we'll look ahead to Barcelona as well because of those TDs that are coming in, which are going to be or that TD, which could shake up the order, or will it? We'll be back in a couple of moments. Quick word on our show partner, Audi. The philosophy of Audi Sport isn't just about winning races. It's about pushing boundaries. Everything learnt on the track goes straight into Audi's road cars, making them just as thrilling as they are refined. Take the Audi RS range, serious performance, but with a level of sophistication and refinement that doesn't need to be loud to make a statement. It's that perfect blend of power and precision wrapped in quiet luxury. Whether it's their powerful style or the RS sports suspension with Quattro all-wheel drive for razor-sharp handling, Audi is constantly redefining the future of performance. Book a test drive today to experience the Audi RS range for yourself. Welcome back to the F1 show, sponsored by Audi. Still joined by Bernie Collins and by David Croft in front of his immortal line on the wall behind him. Can't believe you have that. It's great. Does it light up, by the way?
No, it doesn't. No, it doesn't. Doesn't need to because the lights are going out. So why would it light up?
Let's have a conversation, if we could, about Ferrari and Charles Leclerc and Lewis Hamilton. Should we start with Charles? He led every single practice session. Took pole position back off Lando Norris and then lost it again to him. He was obviously really deflated, and he knew that from Saturday because all of the elation of last year. He is, though, a maestro, Bernie, around the streets of his home.
Yeah, and it would have been lovely to see him celebrate there again. Last year was such a special moment. But, I think McLaren and Norris did well to do that, a different plan to everyone else in Q3, which seemed to at least work for them on that soft tyre. And it's very, very small margins here. And that's why, Charles Leclerc was so upset post-Saturday is, it's going to be very, very difficult to gain that back on Sunday, barring Norris having some sort of shocker off the line. And it was. They remained in the positions that they started in. So it was all down to that Saturday qualifying position. But a much, much stronger the weekend than we'd all been led to believe it was going to be for Ferrari. We'd been hearing the stories of how they're poor at slow speed, and that didn't exactly come to fruition.
They didn't have to run it, though, as high as they have when you get the range of different speed corners, do they? So actually, it's going to be different in Barcelona when we get there and we get a different range there. They're going to have to run it higher, inevitably, aren't they?
Yeah, I think Barcelona would be definitely a different game there. There's a multitude of different corner speeds. It is a track that really tests overall performance of the car. So I think there is a likelihood they're going to have to raise the ride height or do whatever they need to do to get that car to perform over the full race distance. So I expect the performance to drop a little bit, but let's see, maybe they've resolved their issues that they've been having through the year. They're waiting on these upgrades to come, and Barcelona is normally a good place to bring upgrades.
I'm never going to believe a word Charles Leclerc says to me ever again. I saw him on Wednesday night, and I said, and we said goodbye to each other. So looking forward to the race. Calling you home again for a win. That's not going to happen, he said. Not a chance. We're rubbish in slow speed corners. No, don't go practicing me winning. And then he went and kind of dominated all the practice sessions. But I thought McLaren played a blinder with their qualifying strategy. It really got the drivers dialed in for where they needed to be, and Lando took advantage. And I'm with you, Bernie. I'm not expecting Ferrari to be that strong in Barcelona until they can solve the problems around the rear end of their car and running it as low as they need to run it. And I don't think we've seen the evidence so far that is coming or has come. Now, maybe with new upgrades, they'll be absolutely fine. But it's a big engineering job to fix what we think they need to fix, not helped by the person that was leading that project leaving when only 90% of it had been completed. And there will come a time, as you alluded to at the start of the show, that they'll just have to switch off this year and think about next year. And in many other years, they'd have carried on with it. But yeah, I don't see Ferrari getting to the bottom of it necessarily in a quick enough time to make it count for this year. Not that I think that's going to cause any friction with Lewis Hamilton. I see, reports that Lewis might quit at the end of the year. I don't see that happening either. It's just going to be frustrations all round for what could have been a mega year for him joining a new team and Charles Leclerc carrying on with a title challenge. It's just not going to come.
Lewis had been really positive after his comeback drive at Imola, and then getting into the weekend, and then he qualifies and then gets the 3-place grid penalty for impeding Max Verstappen at Massenet, which hampered his chances. He then lost a chunk of time in the early stage of the race. The top 4 were away and gone. He was behind Hadjar and Fernando Alonso. Fernando obviously crashed out with a Duff engine, and then he finished in a creditable 5th position. I say creditable, it was still 51 seconds behind. And I think he was sort of odds to know what had happened. He got a bit of traffic. There was certainly that. But there was also that miscommunication in qualifying has prompted quite a lot of reaction, as you can imagine, from Team LH. Bernie, I'll just read you a couple of these ones. Lucy Tilley, will LH get a new race engineer? GCAF, how quickly can we sack the whole Ferrari pit wall? He's gone that harsh. And Calpesio, when a Ferrari signing Bono? Inevitable, you're going to get that going on. But it was another miscommunication. And what did you think of his lack of pace in the race?
Yeah, so let's start with the qualifying one. I can't emphasize enough how difficult traffic is for the pit wall to work out in Monaco. A few reasons for that. Obviously, GPS is quite poor. Radio is quite poor as well in terms of getting the information across. But and obviously things are happening very, very hectic in terms of, especially with this new soft, because some people were doing double cools, so not an easy run plan to keep on top of either. But the other difficulty in Monaco that people don't often think about is because it's such a short lap. Actually, when you're looking at a GPS dot, to tell the difference by someone on a push and a slow lap is actually very, very small. So the difference, you're looking for small differences in their sector 1 time or whatever. He'd not even gone through sector 1 at the point that this is happening. So you're looking at GPS mini sectors, all of that's quite inaccurate. So I can see where the error came from. Now, obviously, a lot of teams in that situation will err on the side of caution. So if you're unsure if a car is fast or slow, you call it as fast because that's the safest way. And then if he's not fast, you deal with it later. The difficulty with that is if he's not fast and he goes past you and gains the track position, then people will be complaining that Lewis is put in a bad track position because he let another car past. So there's difficulties in both directions. So I can see how it happened. It's a mistake. They're all really experienced guys. But it's not the only traffic mistake we've seen on the weekend. We've seen some shockers in terms of impeding and cars not getting in the way. I think the Lance Stroll one, arguably the worst one. So there's a lot going on there. The race. Okay, so I was a bit surprised that come the second stop, Lewis has lost enough time that Piastri is able to box and come out in front of him. So the pace was off. And what we've seen with this new regulation is that the top 5 are really pushing. In previous Monacos, they're all driving off the pace. This time they were really pushing to open a gap. And Lewis just wasn't able, for whatever reason, to stay with them. And that's surprising given how much Lewis loves Monaco, how confident he seemed going into the weekend. He seemed much more confident than Charles Leclerc was. So that's more worrying for me than the qualifying radio stuff.
Do you think Lewis was having to hold back a little bit though, and try and create a gap for Charles to pit into? Was he actually doing a bit of what Liam was doing for Isaac?
I don't think so, because there was no one directly behind Lewis. Lewis was very much on his own sort of no man's land in that middle bit, definitely the second half of the bit of the race. So I'm not really sure what went on through then. I've not listened to all the radio, Crofty, so you might be right, but I've not listened to it all.
It was just when we had the radio message, right, push Lewis, this is our race now. That made me think that he was running another race, maybe for Charles, in the early stages. And Ferrari had kind of hinted that they might have to do a bit of that
Right.
when they spoke to Martin themselves, because we obviously asked the question, who's going to tell Lewis? And leave that one to Fred for a bit. Which there were a few laps where he was just trying to create a gap if a gap was needed.
Red Bull Verstappen, worst qualifying of the season. 1% off the pace. That was double the deficit of Bahrain in qualifying. I mean, we've talked about this before with regards to the Red Bull, but that RB21, much like previous iterations, does not like curbs, I should say, Bernie, does it? It just is not at home, and it lacks the mechanical grip that some of the others do.
Yeah, and I think we praise Verstappen for very often getting the most out of the car, but if the car is nervous or not consistent lap on lap, not repeatable corner on corner, you don't trust the braking, and we hear so often the complaints about the braking. Monaco's the worst circuit for that. If you don't know reliably where your car is going to place each lap, it's very hard to get the most out of it in Monaco. Every street circuit will be very difficult. The circuits with a bit more runoff, you can maybe catch it, but you can't in Monaco. When you make a mistake, that's it. It's game over. So, yes, I'm sure he will have wished that they could have done better. But they gave it a good shot in the race. It didn't ultimately change his finish position, but they gave it a good shot.
Yeah, holding out for the late safety car, the red flag. Obviously, they did the opposite of the leaders. It was kind of a damage limitation performance for them, wasn't it, for Max? I mean, he's twice a winner around the streets of Monaco. But I want to talk to you, Crofty, about the other car and Yuki Tsunoda. Out of the points again. It's the familiar tale. We've had it so often now. Christian himself has already written off the constructors. But where do we go with this? Because it doesn't matter. Could any other driver on the grid drive that second Red Bull and be within, I don't know, 2 or 3 tenths of Max regularly? I just can't see it. I mean, this is not poor quality drivers we're seeing in the second car. These are very, very decent Grand Prix drivers. And it just is a perennial issue that I don't know how they get on top of it.
No, but I think the answer to your question is yes, but they're not going to sign Lando Norris or George Russell or Carlos Sainz, or drivers of that caliber. And with all due respect to Yuki, who I know is now the most experienced Japanese driver in Formula One history, he's not a Lando Norris. He's a good driver, but he's not a race-winning driver yet. One day I hope he is. Now, I suppose the temptation for Red Bull is just to carry on doing what they're doing, and then maybe they will find, in Arvid Lindblad or whoever's coming through the ranks after him, or even Isaac Hadjar, a driver that can live with Max. But Max is exceptional. Max is a phenomenal talent, and Max will extract way more performance out of any car, I think, at the moment than most drivers on the grid. He's the form driver on the grid, and to say that he's got to get within 2 or 3 tenths of Max is a tall order, a tough order. But Red Bull are a championship winning team, and therefore it's not an unrealistic ask for that second driver in the Red Bull car. I personally think they've got the wrong driver still, and they should have gone. If they want to win a Constructors' Championship, go and get a driver that is good enough. And Yuki might well be in time, but I don't think he's proved it. Well, they should have got Carlos Sainz, but for whatever reason, that didn't happen. Carlos Sainz was the driver available on the market for next year. Now, once you've not got Carlos Sainz, who are you looking for in the future? Lando's locked into a long-term contract. George Russell's out of contract at the end of this year.
What a
George
combo
Russell.
that would be.
Well,
What a combo.
it would be an interesting combo, and it'd give us plenty to talk about. And, I don't think there's any animosity between George and Max. They're just fiercely competitive human beings that have not always seen eye to eye on the track at any given moment. But that's the caliber of driver they're going to have to get. And I've not got a downer on Yuki, trust me. But is he a consistent podium finisher or race winner? Look at the stats. No, he's not. Do you want to be a constructors champion? Yes. Therefore, go out and get a consistent race winner or podium finisher. Otherwise, he's going to finish in the lower reaches of the top 10 when your other driver's going to be, second or third on the grid.
Bernie, we touched on this on the pod the other day. You can see what Alpine are doing, and actually they've now been linked with even potentially Mick Schumacher coming back in, or at the very least Paul Aaron. I don't know if they're going to mix and match all year just because get it right before the new regulations come in. But might we see that, do you think, in the Red Bull senior team as well? Might we see Isaac Agile get an opportunity if this continues along the same lines of what was going on with Liam Lawson, do you think?
Anything could happen. Anything could happen in terms of who they put in that second seat. But they need to be really careful because look at someone like Hadjar. He's come in this year, being very strong, very consistent, getting the job done. And it could ruin him to put him in that Red Bull seat, quite frankly. If
It
there's
ruins
not
everybody.
enough. Yeah, exactly. If there's not enough work done in the background. So, it is a bit the poison chalice, really, if you want to think of it like that. So the bigger question for me for Red Bull is we know Verstappen is this talent. None of us can really put a number on how talented because you never get direct comparison and all of this. Like, how far off has that Red Bull car been over the last few years? But can they improve the car? Can they make, even if they leave Max's car well enough alone, can they make the other car work for a second driver? And they've got all this data. They've got, we talked about them having a second team. They've got the RB data. They've got their own data. Out of those three drivers, pick the driver that's best suited to the characteristics of that car and get that car that has not worked for the last 3 or 4 years in a race winning position. That's what needs to happen. And they need, like, as much as you say they need to get their driver lineup sorted out for next year, they need to get the car sorted out for next year. Like, they are, if Max wins the championship this year, the driver championship, it would be his best by far win of a driver's championship because the package is not working. So they need to get on top of that for next year.
What we're seeing is world class, isn't it, Crofty? It's world class every single time we talk about Max. Actually, what we're seeing is something extraordinarily special.
I totally agree, because it's not like Max is really happy with the car. It's not like Max says this car's an absolute dream. He's driving around the problems because he has got that talent. I don't know if you can engineer a car in two different ways at a racetrack, and I don't know in time whether Yuki Tsunoda will get used to it and his muscle memory will become more adept at this Red Bull rather than the racing bulls, and he might go and score better points. But I know what you're saying about the engineering lineup, Bernie, but can a good jockey make a bad horse great? No. A better jockey can make a bad horse better. It is the only analogy I can give there, and I've backed many a bad horse in my time. Trust me.
You could make the second Red Bull a racing bull. Just do that. Just have
exactly.
a complete copy of that. That'd actually be closer.
That is scoring more points at the minute, isn't it?
It would. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Simple.
Obviously, you can't, Simon, because the regulations.
No, I know that. I know. Yeah.
Allow that.
Yeah, it's not allowed, but
it's a better idea than your Princess Grace Avenue idea.
Better idea than the Avenue Princess Grace. So Mercedes, who said just quickly stuck behind Williams, nothing they could do. They were on the hards. They ran long. They were hoping for a safety car, a little bit like Max Verstappen. Russell pitted laps 64 and 70. Antonelli, as we discussed, 71 and 73. But before we move on to Barcelona, just let's talk about the dive at the Nouvelle Chicane to get ahead of a dawdling Alex Albon. And then he comes over the radio and says, I don't care if I get a penalty or something like that, does it? And so, of course, the stewards hear this and they chuck the book at him. I mean, he probably should have expected it anyway, because you're almost buying time, aren't you? But the drive-through, it didn't make any odds, really. Actually, perhaps he finished finished better than he would have done with the drive-through, Bernie, on that one. But in all seriousness, it just kind of summed up the race, didn't it? That moment said it all.
Well, it did sum up the race, and I am, well, looking forward to next year to see what happens because, as you pointed out, Simon, if he'd done it 20 laps earlier, if he'd done it to everyone he came across, he would have finished in a better position. So the drive-through, he was so fast compared to Albon that the drive-through penalty was null and void. He was still in a better position by having had the drive-through penalty. And I've seen it many, many times in the past. You know, one of my drivers did it at Spa. They overtook someone, then we got given a 5-second penalty. But actually, the 5-second penalty was not as much of a disadvantage as being stuck behind the car we were stuck behind. Here's a brilliant example in Monaco where it takes so much time to overtake someone, and he was losing so much time each lap that the penalty didn't fit the crime.
Yeah.
And arguably, I was wondering what Mercedes were going to do with Kimi Antonelli. Do you tell Kimi Antonelli, which I don't think they ever would on the radio, but how do you say to him, actually, this has worked out all right for George. Just cut the chicane. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Because it did, you know, ultimately George he didn't finish in the points, but if he'd done it 20 laps earlier, he could have done. And that means the penalty wasn't harsh enough.
So was Kimi Antonelli in a desperate way to get past Alex Albon, where Alex slammed the brakes on into the Nouvelle chicane after that? Was Kimi aware that had he have got past Alex and then started to really back up Alex, then the penalty for George would have been completely mitigated? He would have got his teammate a point there. By the way, the penalties, it starts at a 10-second. That's your baseline for leaving the track and gaining an advantage. It goes up to that drive-through for being a little bit petulant with it, and I don't blame George for that at all.
But actually, the guidelines, Crofty, just to talk over that a minute, you know, as Bernie is pointing out there, the punishment has got to fit the crime, and actually going forward, they can have anything. These are only guidelines, aren't they? They can actually apply whatever they want to apply.
Well, they can up to a drive-through. That's the maximum I think they can do, unless there's a really justifiable reason. Now, had Kimi blocked
what's that
Alex
justifiable
Albon,
reason? That's what I'm saying.
Well, yes,
you know,
if Kimi had got past Alex and blocked him and held him so much that George would have got a point, then, well, maybe we would have seen, I don't know, disqualification or whatever. But it's ridiculous.
Unsportsmanlike behaviour.
Yeah, Alex bought him dinner though, didn't he? So
yes.
that was good. Sorry, mate. Completely trashed your race. Or I thought I was trashing your race. So here we go. I'll buy you a chicken schnitzel in the evening and whatever else they had. Before we go, because yesterday's Don's voice is beginning to take its toll, the front wing being stiffer by a factor of a third. That is what it is with the static load tests on top of it. 60 newtons force applied to it, can only move 10 millimeters as opposed to 15 millimeters. I think I'm right in saying that, aren't I, Bernie? And how's it going to affect things? What's your take on this?
Well, there's been a lot of chatter about it. Teams have now had, how many races have we had? 8 races to get ready for it. So they know on each deflection test that they do in the FIA garage, they'll know what their deflection is for each of the wings at each setup that they run it. So they'll have known how far out they are, if any are out. We're not obviously privy to that information. So we don't know if anyone's been regularly failing on the new metric of the front wing test. So, you know, as much as teams speculate whether it'll affect them or not, and there was a lot of discussion that it'll affect McLaren, and McLaren have said it won't affect them, they're not worried about it. The proof will be in the pudding. So qualifying in Spain and race in Spain, is someone going to suffer by having to bring a new front wing? And we'll find that out on Thursday when we get the parts that have changed on the car. And is anyone going to suffer with higher degradation, for example, or lower straight line speed? So that's how we'll see it. If someone doesn't have the same speed at the end of the straight as we would expect, that's where we'll see it. So we don't know. And that's going to make Barcelona a little bit more exciting as well, I think.
What we do know is that McLaren say it's not going to affect us.
Yep.
And Red Bull say it might affect them. McLaren say it's nothing to do with our wings flexing, in the same way that we're not cooling our tyres using, different
Water.
materials, sensors, water. By the way, on that one, this is brilliant
Yeah.
because they're quite clever engineers at McLaren. They worked out that to keep their tyres cool, they'd need 7 kilos of water in the tyres, which would be quite heavy. And after 10 laps of Monaco, the water would be boiling, and it would have enough temperature to cook Andrea Stella his pasta for his team dinner afterwards. So forget the water trick. But yeah, is it the wing? Have Mercedes already gone stiffer with their front wing and got ahead of the game, and they will have a more set up knowledge going into that weekend? Our Alpine, our Aston Martin, other teams that are going to get affected as well. Bernie's right. We'll see out on the track. My overriding thought on this, though, is if it's such a big issue, if it needed doing, why wasn't it done at the start of the season? Why have we waited 8 races? Because if it is going to be a dramatic effect, then, well, someone was flexing too much at the start of the season, and therefore it should have been nipped in the bud straight away. We've had to wait until Spain. That just seems a bit of a fudged compromise for me.
I mean, the rear wing tests, or that they were policing the rear wings more since Shanghai. That hasn't actually affected McLaren too much. But if this does, and then we see Red Bull or one of the others coming back at McLaren, a complete inverse of what we saw from 2024, and then you never know, Crofty. McLaren might get back into the state where they have to apply team orders, depending or favour one of the drivers, mightn't they?
I wish I had a straw. I'd bring it to Barcelona with me, and you could clutch at it for the next 8 races.
Well, we are going to Barcelona. We're back for one day only. Bernie, thanks for joining us. You're going to be on. Are you on the same plane as us tomorrow? I think we're leaving at 7:30. We'll be there late. You there early?
Oh no, I'm earlier tomorrow than you.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. Well, we won't
Have
be able
we
to
got
join
the
you for
wrong
dinner tomorrow.
strategy?
Yeah,
Have we done
We've
the
done
wrong
the wrong
strategy?
strategy.
I'm going to get in
We-
time for my dinner. Have some dinner. Nice relaxed evening in Barcelona. Ready for Thursday at the track. It's going to be a hot one.
Discussing. Is it?
Yeah. Have you not read my
Okay.
pre-event email? Come on.
I
Steve.
didn't even know it had come out yet. I wish I'd read it before this. I might have talked some sense, but that never happens. Thank you, Crofty, for your debut on the
Thank
F1 Show podcast. I think it's gone
I
very
would-
well. We might allow you back.
Thank you. I'd love to come back, and I will leave you with this satisfying thought that after the lack of overtaking in Monaco, at least we're going to a track now where there is plenty of overtaking historically, and it's not like 91% of the races have been won from the front row. Oh, yeah, no, it is.
Okay, thanks, Bernie. Thank you, Crofty. I will see
Cheers,
you
mate.
tomorrow at some stage on some flight or in some hotel or on the bus on Thursday. But from us all here at the pod, the F1 Show pod, we'll see you later. From us all here. Bye-bye.